Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be looking at the Amazon ability bow and crossbow multi-shot. Multi-shot is a rather confused and ridiculous mess. It doesn't really tell you enough on the skill. I mean, the skill says it magically splits one arrow or bolt into many. It says it reduces your damage by 75%, which is pretty ridiculous. And of course, as it levels up, it gains more arrows. And this is also a subject of rather silliness in the ability, is that it just ceases to gain more arrows. So eventually, at a certain point, when you're putting points in, you'll notice that it goes from 10 to 11, 12 to 13 mana cost, 14 to 15, and so forth and so on. And at some point, which is at level 22, the ability just simply ceases to get new arrows. It goes from level 23, or 22 with 23 arrows, to 24, and mana cost of 25 to 26. But when you go from level 23 to 24, there's no more arrows. You don't gain anything by getting higher than level 22. So, basically, this skill just simply costs you more mana as you increase the skill, and it's stupid. I don't know why there's no other added benefit to leveling up the ability, or why the mana cost continues to increase despite the fact that there is no additional benefit involved. Definitely something that I would consider in the bug category, especially considering that lately the ability has been given a synergy, which means for things like Guided Arrow and Strafe, you have to max out the ability, which means that you're forced into utilizing the higher mana cost version, whether you want to or not. There are other things that go on with multi-shot, and the logical person would assume that with multi-shot you could hit a target multiple times. Like, for instance, if I'm standing right in front of a monster and I fire multi-shot, you would think that I could just blast the target in the face with 72 arrows, well, 24, which is our maximum. But the thing is that you can't hit any target more than one time with multi-shot. It is a thing that is added into the game called next hit delay. So next hit delay essentially makes it so that a monster cannot be hit more than one time by an ability within a set period of time. Now, for the next hit delay for this particular ability, it is 0.4 seconds. 0.4 seconds is enough to basically make it so that, actually not 0.4 seconds, 4 frames, sorry. 4 frames, which is 4 over 25, so 4/25ths of a second, my bad. So if 4/25ths of a second is enough to ensure that a monster cannot be hit more than one arrow at a time. There's also other problems with this ability. Things that aren't really told to you, and you don't really understand how they work, because the game's not going to fill you in on these details. Number one is multi-shot doesn't apply effects like you would think it does. Like, say, for instance, you were wearing, I don't know, something really cool like Atmos Scarab. Or you were utilizing a really awesome bow that has amplified damage charges on it, like Witch Wild String. Multi-shot does not apply effects on anything but the middle 2 arrows. And if there is an odd number of arrows, it is the middle arrow and the arrow immediately on the right of the way that the Amazon is facing. Only these 2 center arrows can actually proc anything. In fact, there is a laundry list of things that can only be procced by the middle 2 effects. And I'm going to go over those really quickly. So Crushing Blow is only applied by the middle 2 arrows. Open Wounds, chance to cast on striking, like for instance the amplified damage proc on the Witch Wild String. Hit Splints target, hit causes monster to flee. Freezes target, and even knockback and slows target are only applied on the middle 2 arrows, which is just garbage. If I'm out here in the, in fighting, and I'm relying on my knockback or my slows target to do the job for me, and it's only applying on those middle 2 arrows, then if a monster is being hit by the edges of the multi-shot, they're not going to get knocked back. They're not going to be slowed. and it's going to cause you some issues. Now, in the past, there were no synergy effects on multi-shot, but now we do have that that nice 12% damage bonus per level from Guided Arrow. So if we beef up Guided Arrow to its maximum, we get a nice little bump in damage to our multi-shot, which is certainly not bad. It's not really enough to make it like super duper viable, but if you are building specifically for multi-shot, you usually end up building things like max damage charms, plus to enhanced damage like fortitude, laying of hands for the demon damage, and so forth and so like that. You're basically just ignoring the fact that all of your damage is being taken away, and just going for it anyway. Now, there are also some other little quirks about multi-shot which I need to go over. One of them is the fact that multi-shot also reduces the duration of all cold effects by 75%. So if you have any cold damage of any source, like for instance the 1545 on Ravenfrost, if you're relying on that cold damage, like maybe you have some cold damage charms, or maybe you even have some cold damage on your amulet, like an Eye of Leech, or trying to think, there's tons of different sources that have cold damage on them. The cold duration gets reduced tremendously, so you can't really rely on the chilling effect as much. And you may also notice that just when I'm firing my bow out here with the multi-shot, the monsters are getting chilled, but it's so short of a duration that it doesn't hardly do anything. And if the monster has some duration reduction on their own, like if they have half freeze duration on their modifiers, it's just going to make it even more silly. Your like 5-second chill goes down to like, like 1 second, and then their 50% chill, freeze duration is bringing that 1 second down to like 0.5, and by the time you're done, you've got like no freeze duration whatsoever left on multi-shot. Poison length is not reduced, but there is a penalty involved. It does apply a -1 penalty to the sources, which there is some pretty advanced information on that, and I'm not really going to go over it because it's honestly, I'm not even going to lie, it's a little above my head. If you take a look on Amazon Basin, though, there is some very good links with some parses by a German fellow, which I had to auto-translate his page. But he does go over all of the technical details on how poison is affected by multi-shot. We also have the percentage of life in Mana Steel is also reduced by 75%. So, of course, our physical damage is being reduced by 75%, which means we're getting less life in Mana Leech. And on top of that, we're also getting a penalty of a rounding down effect. So, for instance, if we have 7% Mana Leech, it's going to be rounded down to 6. So they apply the 75% penalty, and then we also get the rounding down penalty on life and Mana Leech, which means that life and Mana Leech with multi-shot is extremely ineffective. You need rather high numbers to get really anything good out of it, and this is, of course, before the penalties for hell difficulty, and the penalties that the monster applies. So if you thought that the original life leech penalties were bad, let me tell you, the multi-shot penalties are like 1,000 times worse. You've got to go through 4 different penalties before you reach your like last amount of life leech done. The first one is the multi-shot 75% damage penalty, which is of course reducing your damage by a pretty harsh amount. Life Leech is affected by that. Then you also have the rounding down penalty, which is your second penalty, which is essentially going to take whatever percentage you have and round it down by 1%, which makes that even worse. Then the hell difficulty penalty is 33% of your Life Leech. So whatever your Life Leech is, doesn't matter, it's 33% of that. So if we were at 10%, for instance, or 9%, we would be at 3%. And then on top of that, there's also the drain effectiveness modifier of the monster themselves. So if the monster has a 50% drain effectiveness, or a 75% drain effectiveness, or a 33% drain effectiveness, it's now reducing that number even further. And so multi-shot just kind of gets hosed when it comes to this. You do hit multiple monsters, which is certainly nice, and the multiple monster hitting does make up for a little bit of the penalties, but your mana and your life leech end up so low, and the mana cost of multi-shot ends up being so high at 30 per shot at level 27 that a lot of the times it's pretty difficult to maintain your mana when it comes to this ability. Just firing it, for a short period of time without hitting a target, and you'll notice your mana is just completely gone. Doesn't really take a whole lot of shots. So it's kind of important to actually be hitting something. Now, granted, if we were in place like the cows, where there's all those monsters, there's definitely a large number of targets to hit, and it's certainly helpful to have those targets handy. Like here in the River of Flame, you can see that I am hitting targets off the screen. You can see the life and mana leech procs above my head, but it's not enough to sustain. And it's just, it's an issue that multi-shot has always had. It's just a really high mana cost, and the life and mana penalties are just terrible with this ability. Multi-shot does come in charges, by the way, if you ever want to play around with it on a non-Amazon. There are gloves that can spawn with multi-shot charges. I think it's like level 4 or level 5. And you can also find the occasional bow with multi-shot charges on them if you want to use it on like a non-Zon. I've seen them with upwards of level 8, I want to say, multi-shot charges. I could be wrong on that. Amazon Basin does have some information on that. Hold on. Yes, so minimum eye level... charges level... So level 8... can be on missile weapons, and level 4 is the highest that you can get on gloves. And the number of charges is 30. Yeah, 30 at level 4 and 60 at level 8. So if you can find a pretty nice bow with multi-shot charges on it, could be interesting for some elemental damage builds, because it does apply elemental damage on all the arrows, which is certainly very nice. I mean, as you can see, when I'm out here and I'm firing my bow at these monsters, they are getting chilled, even though the chilling effect doesn't last very long. They are getting applied with the various elemental damage, like poison damage, cold damage, and so forth and so on, which is certainly one of multi-shot's biggest benefits, is that you can apply elemental damage to multiple targets. As you can see, I got the poison damage, and it's basically hitting everybody. This is something that you can do early on that works pretty well on Amazon, is you can basically just take a bow, and you can fill it, with Tal runes, and you can just get a large amount of poison damage, which will tick away and slowly kill the target. In early versions of the game, like normal difficulty and nightmare difficulty, you can actually effectively use poison builds pretty well. Poison builds become extremely difficult in hell, though, just simply because it's obviously a lot more difficult to get yourself the higher damage poison charms. And on top of that, a 6 Tal rune bow just isn't going to cut it anymore. You're going to need something a lot better than just Tal runes in a bow to make your way past nightmare and hell difficulty. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to go over when it comes to multi-shot. We've covered the fact that you can't hit a target more than one time. We've covered the fact that only the center 2 arrows actually apply most of the effects on the ability. So things like Crushing Blow, for instance, if I was using like the Giant Skull with 10% CB, or Duress, which has 15, Gore Riders, which have 15 Crushing Blow, and so forth and so on. These effects are really only applied to those 2 center arrows, which means that stacking Crushing Blow and Open Wounds on a multi-shot Zon is pretty ineffective. There is a skill that works much better with Crushing Blow and Open Wounds, and that is Strafe. Because Strafe has some very nice abilities to proc multiple effects. So every single arrow of Strafe has the ability to proc an effect, whereas only the center 2 arrows on multi-shot can proc an effect. So say, for instance, you had the Witch Wild String on, and you wanted to get that amplify damage effect, but you still want to use multi-shot. So let's say you prefer to use multi-shot even. What you want to do is you want to use strafe to see if you can get that amplified damage proc up, which strafe usually does a pretty good job, and then use your multi-shot to kill the targets afterward once the amplified damage is up on the targets. It's a much better skill for proccing effects, and if you're relying on a procced effect, especially with multi-shot, it's not really going to go very well for you, because as you can see, even though I have Witch Wild String on, I'm not probably going to see an amp damage proc. Like, it's just probably not going to happen. One of the other things that I can go over with multi-shot, though, is its ability to spread its arrows at varying distances. So all of the abilities that are like that are like this, Shockwave, multi-shot, Teeth, they all have this ability. So if you click far away from yourself like this, you will notice that the arrows are all tightly bunched together. So the further away you click, the tighter the bunch of arrow is. The closer to your character you click, the more spread out the arrows become. And you can control exactly how the spread of the multi-shot is by clicking at varying distances. And this is a very good way that you can control, essentially where the ability is going, where it's focused more like, and get a better shot pattern. Like, for instance, if I was in the cows, I would probably want to do one that was closer to my character, spread it out as much as possible so I'm hitting as many targets as I possibly can at one time. Whereas if I'm fighting in an enclosed space, like say I'm fighting in the maggot layer or something, I don't really need my arrows spread out to that degree. So I'm going to fire them more in a line like this to get the maximum effect. Now, granted, you can't hit a target more than one time with an arrow, but with the addition of Pierce, especially if you don't have a high level of Pierce, you are essentially utilizing the percent chance. So when one arrow is killed because it doesn't pierce through a target, the other arrow that's next to it does go through and perhaps hits several other targets more. And they can pierce up to 5 times. So you have a total number of pierces of 5 with these abilities. Something like multi-shot is definitely going to take advantage of things like a critical strike and penetrate, which are going to help you tremendously by increasing your attack rating and also the damage output of the ability. In fact, I would probably recommend having as high critical strike as you can get with a multi-shots on. Not necessarily put points into it. That's not really what you have to do. But you got to account for your plus to skills, any deadly strike which you may have on your character. Like, for instance, let's say that you have High Lord's Wrath on, which is 35% deadly strike. So it doesn't really stack directly, but they do stack, and so you don't really need to have a huge amount of critical strike if you're also running, say, 35% deadly strike from High Lords, and then maybe you're also running Gore Riders, which is another 15% deadly strike. And so before you know it, you're sitting at, what is that, 35 plus 15, so 45, so 50. So you get 50% deadly strike, which means that you really don't have to have much more than about 50% crit, although you could go a little bit higher. Let's say about like 75% would be a decent amount, or 65%, because how it works is if you have 50% deadly strike and you have 50% crit, they both roll, and you get about 75% chance is what it ends up being. So you kind of want a little bit higher, especially as a physical damage character. You want to get that up to as close to 100% as you can. But with a 50% and a 50%, you're rolling pretty close already. And most of the attacks that you get off are going to, obviously crit. As for attack rating, you definitely want to have good attack rating with multi-shot. As you can see, the difference between the attack rating on strafe, which is 8,028, and the difference between multi-shot is 3,307. And when you look at multi-shot, you'll notice that multi-shot doesn't have any attack rating bonus. It has none, which means that you have to build penetrate, because it's going to be the attack rating for your ability. And now you can see, now I'm at 6,705 with an 88% chance to hit, which was much better than I was at before. Penetrate is probably going to be one of your main skills for this particular build if you're going to do a multi-shot build, because every time you fire this bow, like I was talking about earlier, you need that mana steal, you need the life steal, and you also obviously want your attacks to actually be hitting the targets, because it makes a lot more sense if you're going to be firing this bow to actually be hitting things. And because it has attack rating issues in the form of essentially no attack rating bonus on the skill, you're going to have to make up for it with other ways to build up your attack rating. And Penetrate is the easiest way to get that really nice attack rating bonus, which is definitely going to help you out. As you can see, though, like, this is P8 Shank, and I am using which Wild String? Let's switch to Wind Force, which probably has a better chance on Shank. As you can see, he does get knocked back if I'm attacking him directly. So if I am attacking directly at Shank, that middle arrows, those middle arrows are hitting him, and he is getting the effect. But I've got to make sure that I'm hitting him with those middle arrows, otherwise the knockback effect isn't really working. The crushing blow, the open wounds, and all that stuff isn't really working, which is detrimental to the build entirely. I think I've covered just about everything I can with this ability, and I hope that I've kind of demystified multi-shot for you guys and gals out there who have maybe had trouble with multi-shot in the past. I know I have had trouble with multi-shot in the past. I am not ashamed to admit it. It is a complicated ability with just a whole lot going on. A lot of penalties, a lot of variable things that don't make much sense, like the increased mana cost, the fact that you can't hit targets multiple times. I mean, the list goes on and on. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, and keep watching.